Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Bhagavatam, Canto 1, which verse? Canto 1, Chapter 4, Text 25. Translation and commentary by His Divine Grace Srila A.C. Bhakti Vedanta Swami Prabhupada, Founder Acharya Viska. Stri Shudra Dvijabandhunam Trayi na Shruti Gochara Karma Shrayasi Murhanam Shraya Evam Bhavedeha Iti Bharatam Akyanam Kripaya Munina Kritam. Out of compassion, the great sage thought it wise that this would enable men to achieve the ultimate goal of life. Thus he compiled the great historical narration called the Mahabharata for women, laborers, and friends of the twice-born. Purport: the friends of the twice-born families are those who are born in the families of Brahmanas, Kshatriyas and Vaishyas, or the spiritually cultured families, but who themselves are not equal to their forefathers. Such descendants are not recognized as such for want of purificatory achievements. The purificatory activities begin even before the birth of a child, and the seed-giving reformatory process is called Garbhadhan Sanskar. Cell phones off, please. One who has not undergone such Garbhadhan Sanskar or spiritual family planning is not accepted as being of an actual twice-born family. The Garbhadhan Sanskar is followed by other purificatory processes, out of which the sacred thread ceremony is one. This is performed at the time of spiritual initiation. After this particular sanskar, one is rightly called twice-born. One birth is calculated during the seed-giving sanskar, and the second birth is calculated at the time of spiritual initiation. One who has been able to undergo such important sanskars can be called a bona fide twice-born. If the father and the mother do not undertake the process of spiritual family planning and simply beget children out of passion only, their children are called Dvija Bandhus. These Dvija Bandhus are certainly not as intelligent as the children of the regular twice-born families. The Dvija Bandhus are classified with the Shudras and the woman class, who are by nature less intelligent. The Shudras and the woman class do not have to undergo any sanskar, save and accept the ceremony of marriage. The less intelligent classes of men, namely women, Shudras and unqualified sons of the higher castes, are devoid of necessary qualifications to understand the purpose of the transcendental Vedas. For them, the Mahabharata was prepared. The purpose of the Mahabharata is to administer the purpose of the Vedas, and therefore within this Mahabharata, the summary Veda of Bhagavad-gita is placed. The less intelligent are more interested in stories than in philosophy, and therefore the philosophy of the Vedas in the form of the Bhagavad-gita is spoken by Lord Sri Krishna. Vyasadeva and Lord Krishna are both on the transcendental plane, and therefore they collaborated in doing good to the fallen souls of this age. The Bhagavad-gita is the essence of all Vedic knowledge. It is the first book of spiritual values, as the Upanishads are. The Vedanta philosophy is the subject matter for study by the spiritual graduates. Only the postgraduate spiritual student can enter into the spiritual or devotional service of the Lord. It is a great science, and the great professor is the Lord Himself, in the form of Lord Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and persons who are empowered by Him can initiate others in the transcendental loving service of the Lord. For spiritual understanding, and what distinguishes human life from animal life is not simply that one has a differently constructed body, nor even that one is more intelligent than the animals. But the endeavor for spiritual understanding, that is the significant feature which distinguishes humans from animals. Otherwise, animals are also eating and sleeping, having sex, and making arrangements for their defense, and also making arrangements to attack others. This is animal life. So a human being cannot be considered in a separate category from the animals if he only does these things. You may say, well, a human being is more intelligent. But then among the animals there are different gradations of intelligence. A dog is more intelligent than an ant. So why is it that a human should be considered very special if he's more intelligent than a dog? It's only a more developed level of intelligence. He can only be properly considered a human if he takes to God realization, so spiritual realization. But spiritual realization is not simply a matter of imagination. It's not simply a matter of saying, I believe in God. When I say it's not simply a matter of imagination, that means that there are specific processes of spiritual realization which begin even before birth. In other words, those who are from what Prabhupada has described here as the spiritually cultured families, Brahmanas, Kshatriyas and Vaishyas, they're known as Dvija. In these families there are two births. So the first birth is given by the parents. When does that birth begin? The birth begins at the time of impregnation. So that is considered the first birth. Now, that should be done in such a manner, that should be arranged in such a manner, not simply that you drink a bottle of whiskey and then like that. You watch some movie you have some video and then something happens. But the consciousness should be prepared for planting the seed in the field. In the Vedic literature, it is described that the father gives the seed and the mother is like the field. So the child is actually considered the child of the father more than the mother. The family line is calculated according to the fathers, not the mothers. So before impregnation, the consciousness should be prepared. And the time should be selected. What is the proper astrological time for impregnation? This is so as to attract a soul to the body, a certain soul who will be suitable for spiritual cultivation, an elevated soul. Actually, everyone in this material world is degraded. One may be very proud, I am a Brahmana. But actually a Brahmana is also a degraded position, because every position in this material world is degraded. But it is relatively elevated to those who have no consciousness of a higher purpose of life. Brahmana means Brahma Janatiti Brahmana, one who knows what is the absolute truth. So the consciousness should be prepared. The proper time should be considered. Blessings should be taken from seniors, elevated persons. Permission should be taken from Guru. There are so many conditions in which controlled family, here Prabhupada says spiritual family planning. It is a controlled activity. Lust, that means uncontrolled. But spiritual family planning means that it's controlled. Now normally we think of family planning, we control birth by some artificial means, by taking some pills, there are various methods. But the control that is given here is that, first of all, the parent should be self-controlled. That means in control of the mind and senses, not simply that you put some control on the body so that the semina doesn't reach the ovum or some such thing. But the mind and senses should be controlled. Now, Prabhupada, he said that our devotees, they can't follow all these different processes, so at least they should chant 50 rounds of Hare Krishna mantra. Please, everyone, if you have a cell phone, which probably most of you do, kindly turn it off. 50 rounds of the Hare Krishna Mahamantra should be chanted in preparation for impregnation. But although that's the minimum, but that's actually in and of itself not enough. Because if you're watching TV and reading all useless novels and eating karmi food and then one day you chant 50 rounds, it's not going to have the same effect as if one is actually leading a controlled life. Modern life is based on don't control the senses. And spiritual life begins with the serious commitment to control the senses. So one cannot expect that the child born will be very much of controlled senses or very elevated if the parents themselves are living like Shudras or lower. The spiritual life means regulated life. So the first birth is given by the impregnation, and the second birth, or generally we think there's the second birth means when the child comes from the womb. That's called garbhastha. First birth means to the child is within the womb, and the second bhumistha, they come out onto the earth. But here Prabhupada has said that the first birth is by impregnation and the second birth is by samskar, the upanayanam samskar, by which one is to begin the study of the Vedas. Of course there are purificatory events and blessings from the brahmanas and so many things when a child is what we call born, comes from the womb of his mother. But from the spiritual point of view, the first birth is when there is the endeavor to have a spiritually inclined child. That means that by performing the Garbhadhan Sanskar, one is attempting to invoke the mercy of the Lord, by which a child who is, or a living being who is ready to take human birth and who is spiritually elevated from a previous birth, so that such a child or such a person may become the child who takes birth in the womb of the mother who is thus impregnated. So that is the first birth. And simply to be born like that, that is not in and of itself the guarantee of spiritual life, because training also has to be there. It may be that the child is from previous birth an exalted personality, but still training is required. So that training, of course training that begins in cultured families, and that begins from the very beginning of life. training in human behavior. What to do, what not to do. Just like, for instance, don't put your hand on your mouth here. Get it purified. If you read this book, My Memories of Srila Prabhupada, you'll find out I personally saw Prabhupada chastise someone for this. So actually this training should come at the very beginning of life. Just recently I saw, of course I used to see when I was living in Bangladesh, but one in Gujarat, one Bangladeshi village woman, with her husband, is staying in a temple community which I was visiting. Now you may think, Bangladeshi village woman, that's not very, that's not very cultured. You see, we're all educated, executive class. So Bangladeshi village woman, can't even sign her own name. So that's not very cultured. But actually, because the educated class, they've been educated as Paka Sahibs, the Indian educated class. So they've all lost their culture. Whereas here we're talking about Sri Shudra Drija Bandhu Nam, the fallen classes of India. They're actually, because they didn't lose their culture so much, because they're not so educated. So they're more cultured, especially in Bengal. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. No, the Krishna's Kaviraj Goswami says, Paschima Loksha Mura Anacha. People on the western side of India, they're all fools and rascals who don't know how to behave properly. Actually, he was referring to Mathura. The culture appears, even at that time, the culture was not very prominent. So I talking about this Bangladeshi village woman. So she brought in her child to see me, her young son. And the boy, he's just beginning to walk, but he can't talk. And at that age, the tendency is to put the hand in the mouth all the time. So she was all the time, like maybe 2 or 3 times a minute. As soon as he put his hand to his mouth, she'd take it away. He'd put his hand to his mouth, she'd take it away. And I think she wasn't even thinking about it. It was almost like a factory machine. He was doing, and before he could get his hand to his mouth, taking away. So this means even before he can talk, he's being trained. Now I may think, well, what's that? Because putting the hand in the mouth is dirty. Why dirty? See? Looks clean. You can lick your finger, it still looks clean. But actually it's dirty, it's contaminated. Because, as Prabhupada said, the mouth is more contaminated than the anus. And actually, if you consider, most of the diseases are orally transmitted. There are so many germs in the mouth. But those who are Shudras, they don't know this. They don't have training. Prabhupada speaks about the higher caste families. They're spiritually cultured. Why are they called spiritually cultured? Is it simply that by having a Kshatriya, Brahmana or Vaishya name, some name like Vyas or Patel or Ranna, these are names of higher caste. Is it simply by having a name that you are considered spiritually cultured? No, culture means activity, way of life. So these Shudras, they're simply meant for eating, drinking, sleeping. Drinking means not just water, all kinds of things, and illicit sex and all these kinds of things. Of course, even Shudras in traditional Indian culture, many of them were very cultured. But if someone from a Shudra background, they're uncultured, then what can you expect? But the higher caste, they're supposed to uphold the values. So this kind of thing, putting the hand in the mouth, actually it shouldn't be done, only when... Don't worry, I was going to say this anyway, not just because you happen to have your hand in your mouth. But I'm just giving it as an important example. That, you put your hand in the mouth, then it becomes contaminated. You don't think. And then you're going to pick up the Srimad Bhagavatam. Or you're going to go and do Arati. But then actually everything you do becomes an offense. That's why the concept of untouchability was there. Because the Brahmins, they had to engage in puja. And contamination spreads by touch. If you touch a contaminated person, then you also become contaminated. So those who are not trained in this culture, they're all the time doing things. That I was saying, you should only put your hand in your mouth when you're eating or when you're brushing your teeth. That's all. If there's any other time, then you have to at least wash your hands. So they have this habit of chewing their nails, or they put their car keys in their mouth, lick their finger and then turn the pages. So these are all very uncultured activities. These are basic things which are taught at home. These things should be taught at home. So many things. Bowing down before sadhus, bowing down before parents. Because nowadays the children don't want to respect their parents. And in most cases the parents are not worth respecting anyway. But actually the culture is that the parents, they should be so exalted in character that they impart the training to the children, and the children are very happy to bow down before their parents. The children are not rebelling because the parents, they looked after the children with such concern and trained them so nicely that the children felt very thankful to their parents. So it's such a nice culture. All these things so many points were taught in the home, and then the children were sent away from home. Basic training, and then they're sent to the Gurukul, the house of the Guru, who trains them. What they may have had some initial idea from the parents, but the Guru trains thoroughly in spiritual knowledge. So that Upanayanam Samskar, that is the official ceremony by which one is admitted into the Gurukul for being trained as a brahmachari. So the Upanayanam Samskar, that can take place, that's only for the higher caste families. Why is that? Because within the family the training is supposed to be there. The Garbhadhan Samskar is supposed to be there. And then the training is supposed to be there. So that when he goes to the place of the Guru, the child is already trained how to respect elders, how you don't put your hands in your mouth. The Guru shouldn't have to waste his time teaching all these things. Prabhupada, of course, used to teach. And nowadays, mostly no one teaches, because I don't know why they don't bother to teach all these things. But actually, all these things, they should be understood. This is a prerequisite for understanding Vedic knowledge. Therefore, the Vedic knowledge is not taught to Stri, Shudra, Dvijabandhu, or persons who don't have this culture. The Ved means the Mool Vedas. They are not taught these things. Of course, women in the higher caste families, they also have to have this culture because they're the first gurus. Firstly, you also have your hand in your mouth. So kindly, you can also wash it. Don't put it anywhere else in the meantime. Of course, mostly people, anyway, there are so many things. At least we can try and get one thing right. And so women, they are the first gurus for their children. They teach them all these things. Don't put your hand in your mouth. Respect elders. How to eat with your right hand, not with your left hand. So many important things. So many important things they teach in the home. But because their duty is to look after children, which is so important. Nowadays, mostly women, they have careers, and then the children are just a disturbance in the career. But actually, by natural function, the women, they're having a child every year or 15 months, something like that. And then they have to look after them. So, they don't have, one thing is they don't have time for studying the Vedas, all these things. Also, by the natural function, women, they can start to give birth 13, 14, 15 years old. So, natural function is there, and then they have to look after the children and train them as they have been trained, and as they continue to be trained within the family. So, they don't study the Vedas. They may be cultured in a certain way, if they are from a cultured family, but they don't study the Vedas. But for women, the only sanskar is the vivaha sanskar, by which they are married, and their function is to assist the husband, who is engaged. His duty is to maintain the family, and to engage to be the guru for the family, spiritual guide. And the wife has her role to assist. And according to Vikasa, they are more fortunate than men because their path is easier. They don't have to undergo all the different Vedic processes. Simply by assisting their husband, they attain the same result as he does. So in this way, one is twice born. He is twice born by first birth is through the Garbhadhan Samskar, and the second birth is by Upanayanam Samskar. Nowadays, these things are not going on, or they may be going on generally as a formality. Still in the families of those who have the names of Brahmanas, they make a big function of Upanayanam Samskar, which is absolutely meaningless. Because, in the first place, they never perform the Garbhadhan Samskar, which means that that's stated by Manu, I believe, that in higher caste families, where if the Garbhadhan Samskar is not performed even once, and a child is born without that Garbhadhan Samskar, then the whole family is converted to Shudras. By that negligence, they are converted to Shudras. So practically you see what is the difference nowadays between Brahmin and non-Brahmin? There's no difference. Only the name. Brahmanas, they're not performing Brahminical duties. They're mostly performing Shudra duty, which is they're employed by somebody. Or they may have their own business, which is, at the best you could call that Vaishya duty. Although actually when it's said that Vaishyas in Bhagavad-gita, Lord Krishna says the duty of the Vaishya is Vanijja. One of the duties is trade. But all this modern business, that's not the business of a cultured Vaishya. All this cheating business and manufacturing chewing gum and plastic ducks and all kinds of useless things. Some kind of culture may be going on in their families. And often we see that from the material point of view, also people born in Brahmana families are quite intelligent. But they shouldn't be proud, I am a Brahmana, because you're not a Brahmana. According to the actual definition given in Shastra, you are Shudra. To call a Shudra would be a compliment, actually, because actually to be a Shudra in Vedic culture, that so many restrictions are there. Otherwise, if you don't follow any restrictions, then you are Antyaja. Then you are not part of the Varnashram system at all. You're born outside it. Then you're Chandal, Lecha, Yavan, and so many things. So practically, to call someone a Shudra nowadays, that is actually a compliment, because people, they're not even on that level. The way people are living, they're living like Lecha, Chandala, Yavan, Rakshas, Asur, and still they're very proud, I am a Brahmana. Of course, in the Varaha Purana, that is stated that in the Kali Yuga, many persons born in Brahmana families, they'll actually be of Rakshasa quality. What is that verse? Rakshasa? I can't remember the verse now. That many persons of very degraded and rascal mentality will be born in Brahmana families and will, on the plea of being a Brahmana, simply oppress and exploit others. So therefore, in Kali Yuga, if there is at all to be spiritual life, then it can't be exactly according to the traditional Vedic system. Because by the nature of Kali Yuga, that system is broken down. It's not possible to properly follow the Varnashram system. Of course, Prabhupada wanted to institute that as far as it is possible. Please don't use the Srimad Bhagavatam to lean on when you're writing. Yes. There are many, many fine points. It may seem troublesome to be taught them in your later life, but we should learn these things so that we can serve Krishna more properly. Krishna consciousness means we should be conscientious. We should know what to do, what not to do. Otherwise, pravritim cha, nivritim cha, janana vidu asuraha. Those who do not know what to do and what not to do, they're actually counted among the demons. So we have to learn this Vaishnav culture. Otherwise, how can you be a Vaishnav if we have the culture of the demons? We have to learn how to live as a Vaishnava, behave as a Vaishnava. And there are many details, because we have to satisfy Krishna. And to satisfy Krishna, we have to know what is required to do to satisfy Him. So unfortunately that training isn't there. Therefore Prabhupada, he wrote that in Kali Yuga there are no Brahmanas. There are people who are posing as Brahmanas, but that simply makes the situation more confused. Real Brahmanas means those who are actually spiritual guides to society, not simply by precepts, not just by talking, but by their very example. In their lives, they themselves are absorbed in Krishna Bhakti and teach that to others. So Prabhupada said it is an emergency because there are no Brahmanas in human society, therefore it's like a body without a head. So in this situation, although traditionally Brahmanas would come from the cultured families, not necessarily that one had to be born in a Brahmin family to be a Brahmana, but generally it was like that. But Prabhupada said now that system is broken down. The Shokra Parampara is broken down. So therefore it is required to establish new Brahmanas, or real Brahmanas, by training even from the ranks of the outcasts. Anyone can be trained. Yata kanchanatam yati kansyam rasa vidhanataha. This Sanatana Goswami gives the example that there is a metal, bell metal, which can, by an alchemical process, be converted into gold. In other words, by a certain process, an inferior quality metal can be transformed into the highest quality, namely gold. So in the same way, tata diksha vidhanena dvijatvam jayate nram. So in the same way, by the process of diksha, anyone from any background can be made into a dvija. By the pancharatrik vidhi, not the Vedic vidhi. Vedic vidhi means that one should have garbhatam samskar from properly qualified parents, and then take the Upanayanam Samskar and go to the Gurukul. That is Vedic Vidhi, which is not possible to be followed in the present day, because where are the properly cultured parents in the first place? They don't exist. Kalo Shudra Sambhavat. Everyone in Kali Yuga is simply born as a Shudra. But by the Pancharatrik Vidhi, even those who are not born in the proper way or brought up in the proper way, they can take Pancharatrik Diksha. And by this process of Diksha, Pancharatrik means that Pancharatras, they are part of the Vedic literature, not exactly the original Vedas, but they serve the same purpose of the Vedas. And they give directions for purification for people in Kali Yuga. So by the process of Diksha, one can be elevated to the platform of a Dvija, which means one who is under the process of training for spiritual life. So this is the real meaning of Diksha. Divya Jnanam Yato Dadyat Korvat Papatsya Samshayam Tata Diksha Vidhanana Kovidas Tatra Samshaya. Diksha, it doesn't mean simply sitting in a ceremony. But real Diksha means to surrender oneself to Krishna through the agency of the Guru and be trained in spiritual knowledge. The foremost duty of the Guru is to impart spiritual knowledge to the disciple, by which he can become purified. Our situation is impure because we are in ignorance. Therefore, ajnanatimirandhasya jnananjana shalakaya chakshuran militam yena tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. We offer obeisances to the Guru. Why? Because he gives spiritual knowledge. So, Sukaka Krishna Prabhu was suggesting that by touching these certificates, people could be benefited. So there may be some benefit there. But it's not that simply a guru goes around touching people or things and giving them so-called spiritual electric shocks. There may be, there is the case of that one follower of Chaitanya, actually Nityananda Prabhu, Abhiram Thakur, who used to beat people, or not exactly beat, but he would lash them with the Jai Mangal, the whip, by which they would, just by the touch, they would become spiritually ecstatic. So that was a special dispensation, unusual. But the general process is that one has to hear very carefully. I also say that requesting everyone to listen very carefully, because it is by hearing repeatedly the messages of Krishna from a guru. Guru means who is coming in parampara and teaches according to parampara and is himself advanced in realization of the messages of parampara. By hearing the messages of the Bhagavatam in this manner, then gradually by hearing in this way, one can become fully purified and fully Krishna conscious. However, Diksha is not given immediately. Some initial training should be there. It has to be seen that the person who is supposed to take Diksha, the would-be disciple, is actually being trained sufficiently so that they can hear. Disciple has to hear the Guru speak. What are the instructions of Gita and Bhagavatam? So one has to be ready to hear, should be at least situated in goodness to some extent. Otherwise, a person who is too much affected by the modes of passion and ignorance, they cannot sit and listen. If one is infected by the mode of ignorance, he will simply sleep during the lecture of the Guru. And one who is too much in the mode of passion, either they can't sit peacefully and listen, or they may sit and they'll be fiddling with their fingers, or the mind is wandering, because the mind is not peaceful enough to hear properly. So one has to be ready to hear. Without hearing, one cannot properly be purified. The intelligence cannot grasp the messages which are being given. Intelligence is required, that is there in the human form of life. But that intelligence, it's not simply a matter of academic intelligence, that one can understand the messages of Bhagavatam. But by purified intelligence, by purification of intelligence, one can understand. Now, Vyasadeva, he compiles the Vedic literature for the Kali Yuga. At the end of every Dwapara Yuga, there is a different personality takes the role of Vyas. The Vyas who compiled the Vedas previous to this Kali Yuga, and who is still living at Badarikashram. Vyasa is one of the Chiranjeevis. He's still living there. But he's done his basic job for this Kali Yuga. So this particular Vyasa is a Shakti-Avesh avatar of the Lord by the name of Krishna Dvaipayana. So his job is to compile the Vedas, edit them, classify them. Previously the Vedas, they are not written down. They are called Shruti. Simply one hears and remembers. That is the qualification of those who are actually intelligent. But in Kali Yuga, all the qualities of human beings are diminished, including Smriti Shakti, the ability to remember. And what to speak of the ability to remember, the ability to understand is also very poor. So Vyasa compiled the Vedas, but actually the Vedas, the original Vedas, are not as important as the Bhagavad-gita and the Srimad Bhagavatam. They are the actually more important message of the Vedas. The Vedas are Traigunya Vishaya Veda. They are mostly, at least superficially, concerned with activities for elevation to higher planets, which means that it's within the modes of material nature. That is called Trivargic. The Vedas, they are mostly concerned with Dharma, Artha and Kama. And when one comes to the Jnana-kanda section of the Vedas, then that means one is interested in moksha, when one comes to study the Upanishads. So Vyasadeva compiled all the Vedas, he edited, put into various books. Previously they were not written down. But it required to be written down so that the record is there. Because in Kali Yuga people may want to alter it by making interpolations. And also because people can't remember. It needs to be written down. So he compiled the Vedas and the Upanishads. And then he compiled the Mahabharata, which is particularly for Stri, Shudra and Dvijabandhu, for women, Shudras, those who are within the Vedic culture but not very elevated. And Dvijabandhu, they're also Shudras, but it means that they are known as members of the higher caste by birth, although by activities they are simply Shudra, fallen members of previously elevated families. So he compiled the Mahabharata for them because it's interesting. It's a story. It's a very interesting story. But actually the purpose of the Mahabharata is to come to hear Bhagavad-gita. There are many important instructions in Mahabharata, but for actual spiritual elevation, one has to hear Bhagavad-gita. So that is compiled for less intelligent people. Of course, everyone in Kali Yuga is less intelligent. But even Bhagavad-gita, in one lecture, of course, generally we praise Bhagavad-gita. We should praise Bhagavad-gita. It is spoken by Krishna himself. Yasvayam padmanabhasya mukha padmatme sruta. It's direct. The Vedas, they emanate from the breathing of Narayana. But Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, has personally and directly spoken the Bhagavad-gita. But in one lecture, Prabhupada was saying that the Gita, even that, will not help people very much. Of course, Bhagavad-gita helps us in all ways. But in Bhagavad-gita, the actual message of the Vedas, which is hardly stated in the Vedas themselves, and in Bhagavad-gita it's stated, but it's not very clearly and straightforwardly and forcefully presented, is that the real goal of life is prema pumarto maha pancham purushartha. The 4 purusharthas, or goals of life, or means. Artha has different meanings. The word has different meanings. So the 4 goals of life for those in Vedic culture are dharma, artha, kama and moksha. But Srimad Bhagavatam begins with dharma projita kaitava atra, with rejecting materialistic religion. So dharma, artha, kama and moksha. Artha, kama and moksha, they spring all from dharma. But in Srimad Bhagavatam, which is Srimad Bhagavate Mahamuni Krite, it is compiled by Vyasadeva, who compiled all the Vedas. And he himself states that whatever else I compiled, it is simply cheating religion. It is a kind of cheating. Cheating because it's presenting to people, you follow this, you follow these rules of dharma, and you can enjoy in the heavenly planets. So it's cheating. It's like giving a child some sugar candy. Yeah, open your mouth, I'll put in a sugar candy. So you put it in, and while the mouth is still open, you put some bitter medicine. So the purpose is to give him the medicine, not the sweet. But because if you say, open your mouth, I'll give bitter medicine, he won't open it. Therefore you give the sugar candy. It's to cheat him for his own benefit. But if he's very supposedly clever, he'll take the sugar candy and quickly close his mouth, and you can't put in the medicine. So actually the Vedic knowledge is meant for bringing us to our real Purushartha, Param Purushartha, which is Prema Pumarto Mahan, the real goal of the Vedas, which is hardly explicitly stated in the Vedas, is to develop love of Krishna. And is not even stated very explicitly in Gita. It's there, but not very straightforwardly. Even Krishna finishes up by saying, surrender to me, not love me. He says, become my devotee, then you surrender to me. But he doesn't very explicitly state that actually you're meant to love me. So mostly the followers of the Vedas, they're very expert in opening their mouth and closing it again. In other words, following the Vedic directions for sense gratification, or even for moksha, and avoiding Krishna, because they're envious of Krishna. So therefore, Vyasadeva, we find in this chapter, it's described how he was feeling morose. Here we go again. He was feeling morose because he had compiled all the Vedic literatures which are meant to lead up to the point of describing how you should surrender to Krishna and love him and enter into love with him, but he hadn't done that. He did everything else, but then what did he compile all the Vedas for? So that everyone could eventually come, you've been through Karma Kanda, Jnana Kanda, now come to love of Krishna. So he did all the preparatory work, and then the real thing he was supposed to do, he didn't do. It's just like if someone invite, now please come, I have made one palatial residence. So you come in, someone invites you, let's walk in and see so you come in through nice gates with guards and nice gardens and hedges and ponds, and you go around gradually, and then you come to a big blank empty space. The walkway and the gardens are supposed to be the approach to the mansion. But if you simply have walkway and gardens and gates and ponds, and then there's no building, then it's not a residence. The whole point is the gardens are supposed to be an approach to and a decoration to the building. So if you make all the approach, but then you make beautiful gardens, and then you sleep outside at night, and you do your cooking like the Mazdurs in India who are working on the building sites. They do their cooking, everything outside. They live, eat, sleep, procreate, everything. They do right on the building site. They live outside. So if you have a beautiful approach road and gardens and all this, and then in the middle of it you're living in an empty space and sleeping outside and cooking outside, it doesn't make sense. So in the same way Vyasa, he had compiled all the different Vedic literatures, but the whole point of it, which is to bring us to pure Krishna consciousness, he hadn't done that. Therefore he was feeling morose. So even Vyasa needs a guru. He had to have Narad come and tell him. So he was feeling morose because he hadn't delineated that, which is delineated in Srimad Bhagavatam. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he is the Acharya, he is the Supreme Lord himself, he is the Acharya of the Gauriya Vaishnava Sampradaya. He gave the idea. Actually the idea was first given by Madhavendra Puri, but Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Madhavendra Puri gave the idea of the topmost love of Krishna, where one simply loves Krishna without any personal desire, even without any personal spiritual desire, that I will Salokya Samipya Sarshti Sarupya. These 4 kinds of spiritual liberations for devotees, living on the same planet as the Lord, having the same opulence as the Lord, living close to the Lord, or having the same form as the Lord. But a devotee, he doesn't desire even this. He desires simply let me love Krishna, and if Krishna wants to give me some benediction, he can. If he doesn't, that's up to him. Complete surrender, complete love for Krishna. So Chaitanya Mahaprabhu came to teach this. Now the general convention is that the head or the founder of a sampradaya, a Vedic sampradaya, he has to write a commentary on the Vedanta Sutra. Because Vedanta Sutra, that is Brahma Sutra, that is giving knowledge, spiritual knowledge. But because it's in sutra form, sutra means very concise form, actually what the message of it is somewhat hidden. So therefore, any Vaishnava or any Vaishnava or non-Vaishnava Vedic Sampradaya, that the founder of that, they have to give a commentary on the Vedanta Sutra with all quotations from the Upanishads to explain their understanding, or what they call their Siddhanta. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu didn't do this, because he accepted the Srimad Bhagavatam as the natural commentary on the Vedanta Sutra by the author himself. Because Vyasadeva, he compiled the Brahma Sutra. But in that, actually it's clear. If our intelligence is clear, then we can clearly understand that in the Vedanta Sutra, it is only teaching Krishna as the Supreme Personality of Godhead. But because our intelligence is not clear, therefore we don't understand. Therefore, to explain that, Srila Vyasadeva compiled the Srimad Bhagavatam. But then we also can't understand that, so Chaitanya Mahaprabhu came to teach. Other Vaishnava Acharyas also taught on the basis of Srimad Bhagavatam. But actually, what is the essence of Srimad Bhagavatam? Even other Vaishnava Acharyas, they couldn't find that. Because even in Srimad Bhagavatam, which clearly explains Krishna's tu Bhagavan Swayam, Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. But who is Krishna? What is the very nature of Krishna by which we love Him? We're speaking of love of Krishna as the topmost goal of life. Then why should we love Krishna? You can also love your dog and your cat and your wife and your children and your country. Why love Krishna? Why should we say to love Krishna? What's so special about Krishna that we should love Him? So Srimad Bhagavatam explains what is so wonderful about Krishna, how He is so lovable, what are His transcendental qualities which make Him Krishna, all attractive. But what is the nature of love of Krishna? That is explained in Srimad Bhagavatam. But the very embodiment of love of Krishna, whose one name is Rasa Murti, who is the embodiment of Prema Ras, loving Krishna, that is Srimati Radharani. But you won't find her name even directly in Bhagavatam, only indicated. Anaya Radhita Nonam Bhagavan Ishvaro Harihi. It's mentioned that she who worships the Lord in the best possible way. But the name is not directly given. It's also a secret. So Chaitanya Mahaprabhu came to teach this particular point. Anarpita charing chirat karunya avatirno kalo samapiyatam rasa swabhakti shriyam. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu came to teach that which no one had taught before. That which is the topmost, resplendent love for who? For himself, because he is Krishna. Sri Krishna Chaitanya Radha Krishna Nahayana. Actually, if we are to understand Krishna intimately, and love means intimate. Love means intimacy. So who can teach on the most intimate level? They are teaching the highest love. Actually, love is not something to be taught. Nitya Siddha Krishna Prem Shadha Kabuno Shabanadi Shuddha Chitte Kariyurdo. Love for Krishna is dormant within the hearts of every living being. And by the process of sadhana bhakti, beginning with hearing from the proper source, then that love for Krishna is reawakened. It is dormant within our hearts. So when we say that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu teaches love of Krishna, rather he teaches the process by which we can reawaken our love for him. But then love, if we're actually going to speak of love, there are different levels. And different Vaishnava acharyas, they have taught love of Krishna on different levels. But only Chaitanya Mahaprabhu taught that he is Radha Krishna. He is Krishna with the sentiment and bodily luster of Radharani. That Radha Bhava Dyuti Subalitam Nomi Krishna Swarupam. He is Krishna, but with the sentiment and bodily color of Radharani. Today is Jagannath Mishra Mahotsav. On this day, is the day after Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was born. So that is described in Chaitanya Charitamrita. In the morning I was speaking about the verse was describing particularly about Garbhadhan Sanskar, not the verse, the purport. So I was speaking particularly about Garbhadhan Samskar and about Upanayanam Samskar. These two are considered Janma. One is called a Dvija, twice born, by having two births, namely the impregnation of the Garbhadhan Samskar and then by Upanayanam Samskar. And actually coming out of the mother's womb in that instance is not considered birth. Because these two births, they are for the spiritual rejuvenation of the person. And I mentioned that for women, there is only one samskar, which is Vivaha Samskar. So the question has come up, who asked this? Sukaka, is this?
Yes.
That is not spiritual initiation a ceremony. Well, yes, it's a ceremony, but it's not part of the sanskars in the varnashram system. When we're talking about spiritual, again I was talking about, these are all Vedic vidhis, but in the Kali Yuga the Pancharatra is more important, the Pancharatric system is more important. So the different sanskars, they are executed within the varnashram system. This could be a very, very big topic of discussion. I'll try and keep it brief. The varnashram system is an interface between material life and spiritual life. That's why when the question came up, that comes up in Vishnu Purana, that how can people come to Krishna Bhakti, which is, in the material world, everyone is interested in sense enjoyment, and Krishna consciousness means to go beyond sense enjoyment and come to the platform of completely surrendering to Krishna. So there's such a big difference between the two, and everyone in this material world is so much contaminated by material desires, then how can a person in this material world come to that stage of Krishna Bhakti? So the answer is given, Varnashramacharvata purushena parapuman Vishnu aradhyate pamta nanyat tatto shakaranam. You should follow the Varnashram system and worship Lord Vishnu. That is the beginning of Krishna Bhakti. Although Chaitanya Mahaprabhu rejected this, Ehobhajya, that is not actually full Bhakti, but it is a beginning. It is an interface between material life and spiritual life. One has material desires, but he's acting in such a way that he can gradually become elevated to the spiritual platform. So within Varnashram society, these sanskars are essential. I was describing that in the morning, that without following these sanskars, the whole society becomes degraded to the platform of Shudras and lower, as we see in the modern age. Even people who proudly introduce themselves as Brahmanas, they would not even qualify as Shudras according to the Vedic system. They have fallen below the level even of Shudras. So when we talk about initiation ceremony, just like in our Krishna conscious movement there's initiation ceremony, so that I was describing this somewhat this morning, that the Diksha is according to the Pancharatric Vidhi, which is a purely spiritual function. The sanskars within the Varnashram system, they are functions for bringing one to spiritual life. But the Diksha within the Vaishnava Sampradaya is purely for bringing one to spiritual life. It's a purely spiritual function. Now, at the same time, those who take Diksha, Vaishnava Diksha, according to Pancharatric system, it doesn't mean that by doing so that they immediately come to the absolute spiritual platform. It would be nice if they could, the opportunity is there. It would be nice if they could, but practically speaking, we see that devotees are at different levels. Therefore, Prabhupada wanted to introduce Varnashram among our devotees, for not exactly among devotees and among society in general, to help devotees to act in according to their present level and according to their psycho-social position, so they can be properly situated within society and practice Krishna consciousness. So I was saying that for women there's only the Vivaha Sanskar, and actually in traditional Varnashram society women don't have a separate initiation. Only the initiation means for men they'll have Upanayanam Samskar, and women, they don't take initiation, they become married, which for them is the initiation is included because they become the Ardhangini, or the half the body of their husband, or Sahadharmini, or Sahadharmacharini, you could say. Sahadharmini, that word was there. You were saying Sahadharmachari. So they get the result of what their husband does by assisting him. So there's in the purely Vaishnav system, which is not exactly the Vedic system, the women, they're also given spiritual initiation. So that is in respect of considering that they're not the body at all, they're spirit soul. So between Varnashram considerations and Vaishnav considerations, there's some kind of tension, and balancing the two and understanding the two can be somewhat, it can be problematic sometimes. Anyway, it's a very, very big discussion. And another part of this big discussion is, why are women considered less intelligent in the Vedas? Well, Ved means knowledge. When we talk about here, we're talking about Vedas. That means the whole body of Vedic knowledge. Veda means knowledge. And that means which is correct. So we shouldn't think that it's just another opinion. But it's a fact. If the Vedas state so, it must be a fact. If in the Vedic knowledge it's stated that the moon is further away than the sun, then we should understand it's a fact. We may look through our telescopes and think it's wrong, but if the Vedas say so, it's a fact. Now, the basic reason why women are considered less intelligent is because we get certain kinds of bodies according to our karma and according to our inclination. So, with the woman's body comes a certain kind of mentality. There's a certain kind of masculine mentality and there's a certain kind of feminine mentality. And nowadays they want to make it all the same. That women will be just like men. But actually, you see, even in the Chinese culture, which is quite degraded according to Vedic understanding, they have this whole idea of yin and yang. You know about that? Yin and yang. Male energy and female energy, and how the two have to be balanced. So men and women have different natures. There are certain masculine qualities and certain feminine qualities. Now, with the woman's body, comes, of course this is a generalization, but it's, at the same time we can understand the truth in it, that generally women are more prone to sense gratification and the bodily concept of life. And to give a very practical, down-to-earth example, if you go in the supermarket, if you go among the cosmetic section, you'll see that there is a section for men's cosmetics and there's a section for women's cosmetics, and the section for women's cosmetics is much bigger. They're more interested in decorating their bodies, painting their nails and all these different kinds of things. So that inclination to identify with the body is more prominent. Therefore, women are considered less intelligent. You don't have to be less intelligent. If you take to Krishna Bhakti, then that less intelligence of identifying with the body, that can go away. Although actually, again, Vaishnav and Varnashram considerations, they're mixed. That's also recommended. You see, we have to understand what applies to us exactly. If a man is a rishi, we don't find many nowadays, there are still some men who live a very renounced life, but they're married, and their wife also lives like that. They just wear some old cloth, and they're not interested in any sense enjoyment. But generally women are recommended that when their husband is at home, they should dress nicely. to make him feel happy. So, generally women, they also like to do that. There was a case even that Prabhupada saw that some of his disciples, women disciples, they were dressing very plainly, and he said that Krishna doesn't like to see ugly gopis. You should dress a little nicely also. But this is the basic reason that why women are considered less intelligent, and because of with that body comes a certain kind of mentality which is more binding to material life, right? And the tendency to be emotional, the more one is emotional, generally he's the less rational. And to be more rational is considered more intelligent. It's not necessarily a disqualification in bhakti. It can be a plus qualification actually, because bhakti ultimately means to have feelings for Krishna. Although, if one is more emotional than rational, then also can be easily misled. So these are all different considerations. Nowadays we have the women's liberation movement, and it's very prominent in India also. They're very much pressing this. Even the BJP government, which is supposed to be promoting Hindu values, made 30% reservation for women in the parliament, which is completely against Hindu values. Because women, by their body and by their mentality, by their body they have children, men don't. I mean, there was the case of Maharaj Mandhata, it's described in the Bhagavatam. He drank the water which was supposed to be drunk by his wife, that had been sanctified by the sages. So she was supposed to drink it and get a child, but then he came and he drank it himself because he was feeling thirsty. Oh, some water, that's nice. He drank it, and then he had a baby. That's unusual. That's unusual. The power of the rishis they put in the water. That's unusual. Generally, men don't have babies. Women do. So by nature's arrangement or God's arrangement, they also have the proper mentality for looking after children. So nowadays they're promoting that, you have a career and then the children become a nuisance in the career and they're not looked after properly. I have so many things to say about this, which I'm always saying, so if you want you can just listen to any of my cassettes. But basically, women have the very important role in society as mothers and wives, not as jet airplane pilots or admirals in the navy or bus drivers or any such thing. Anyway, that's a big discussion. They may shoot me, but what can I say? I have to speak. I read Prabhupada's books. I have faith that what Prabhupada said is that is correct. And if all the big intelligent people of the modern world say something different, who should I accept? Should I accept Prabhupada and the Shastra? Or should I accept all these foolish nonsense people who have made the whole world hell with this? One of the methods of making the modern world hell is to make women so-called free, so that they can be enjoyed by every man on every street corner, and they have no fidelity to their husbands, and just actually creating a whole completely degraded society. So I follow what Prabhupada says and Shastra says, and if you don't like it, well, what can I do? Go to hell. Go to the hellish society. Maharaj, you told a child is known by the father's family heritage. In Kerala, yes, in Kerala it's matriarchal. When I was talking about the Vedic system, not the Keralite system. Keralites, they do things differently. But the Vedic system, according to the Vedic system, the child is considered the property of the father. And the family line comes down in the father line. In one of the lecture by one of the Maharaj, there's a point discussed that I can't read this. Anyway, I already answered 3 questions from one person. Is the cause of our death predestined, like in accidents, disease, old age, or can it be changed through bhakti yoga and Krishna consciousness? Predestined, well, You see, we come into this body with a certain set of karma. But we also make new karma. According to our karma, we get put in certain situations, and then how we respond and how we act in different situations, that also mixes with our previous karma to make our future karma. So it may be that they may have a very good karma, but that may change if they do some bad activities. And also by our association, our karma can change. Just like it's very interesting, one of my godbrothers, he's an astrologer. So he told me, is a very interesting, it's not a very happy story, but it's an interesting one at the same time, that one man died an early death. And they were asking that, the astrologer never predicted this. How is that? We didn't see any such thing. So he looked in the chart, and he didn't find any early death. And then he looked in his wife's chart, and she saw that she had the yoga for being an early widow. So he was affected by the wife. By marrying that particular woman, he had to die early. The astrologer didn't find that out. Otherwise, he would have married her.
Yeah.
So that's very interesting. Also, if one cell phone's off, please. Please explain the importance of Navavidha Bhakti and the importance of chanting in daily life. Well, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu already explained that in 2 verses. What is the importance of Navavidha Bhakti, and what, among these 9 forms of devotional service, what is the importance of chanting? So Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said, he explained the 64 methods of devotional service, and he summarized Bhajane Madhe Shreshta Navavidha Bhakti Krishna Prem Krishna Dite Dhare Mahashakti Tar Madhe Sarva Shreshta Nama Sankirtan Niraparadhe Nama Loile Pai Premadhan. He said that among all the methods of devotional service, these 9, they are the best, because they have tremendous potency to deliver Krishna Prem and to give us Krishna. And among all of them, Nam Sankirtan is the best, because simply by chanting without offenses, one can very easily attain love of Krishna. Quoting myself, if you touch a contaminated person, you also get contaminated. Please elucidate, is it the body or the soul that gets contaminated? Well, the soul by nature is not contaminated anyway. But when we say that the body becomes contaminated, that means that for the sake of performing puja or any auspicious vidhi, one has to be clean enough to do so. The body has to be ritually clean. Bhakti can be done in any situation. Again, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said that Kayate Shuete Jota Tota Namaloi Desha Kala Niyam Nahi Sarva Siddhi Hoy. That even when you're eating or lying down to sleep, you can chant the holy names of the Lord, and in any situation, without consideration of time, place or circumstance, by chanting, one can you can achieve all perfection. But in the matter of deity worship or performing yagyas, there is consideration of purity and contamination. That is why, you see, we ask anyone chant Hare Krishna, but we don't ask anyone come and worship the deity. Because in deity worship, there are many rules and regulations for cleanliness, which if not followed, then offense is caused. So the body becomes contaminated, but the body is supposed to be used in the service of Krishna. And in the service of Krishna, just like touching the Srimad Bhagavatam, you shouldn't, you see, when you're eating, it's not that without washing your hands you should touch the Srimad Bhagavatam. It's an offense. Or if you put your hand in your mouth, which is a common habit nowadays, no one teaches not to do so. So people put their hands in their mouth, which is contaminated, and they touch the Srimad Bhagavatam. It's an offense. So we should learn all these things also. I would like to know the difference between routine work, emergency work, and desired activities. This is taken from, these terms are taken from a purport in Bhagavad-gita. So actually this is Prabhupada's translation of different Sanskrit terms. Nitya karma, Naimitic karma, and Kamya karma. That means that there are daily activities prescribed, such as one should rise early, one should evacuate, brush the teeth, take bath, do daily. In a Vedic household they'll be doing daily yajna, homa, or in modern age it's more recommended that one do sankirtan yajna. All these things should be done on a daily basis. So these are nitya karmas, or routine work. Then emergency work, or actually that means occasional activities. So just like not every day, but on Ekadashi one should follow Ekadashi Vrata. So these are occasional duties, naimitic. Or there are certain activities, just like on the death of a person, there are certain duties that should be performed. So these are not daily duties, these are irregular duties. And kamya karma, that means that in other words, these are descriptions of different types of vidhis to be performed, activities to be performed according to scriptural directions. So kamya karma means that if one has some particular desire to be fulfilled, he may perform some extra vidhis. In other words, or to give an example, if one wants a son, then he may perform under the direction of brahmanas who know about these things, which also are difficult to find nowadays. One may perform some extra pujas or extra vratas, such as fasting, for fulfilling a particular desire. Why are some of God's creations challenging the Lord? Presumably it's meant that why are the jivas in the material world against Krishna? Is that what it's meant? Well, ask yourself. What are you doing here? Why did you come? We're all in that position. The jiva has independence. So he can choose to serve Krishna or not to serve Krishna. If he chooses not to serve Krishna, then he becomes a challenger to Krishna. It is logically we can understand, although in another sense it seems inconceivable. Why should we not serve Krishna? Well, the question is there for all of us right now. Why should we not serve Krishna? But we don't. Even if we come to Krishna consciousness, still we have so many other desires. How Krishna is a God instead Jesus? Well, actually we don't find that Jesus himself ever claimed to be God. Only his followers claimed him to be God. So who is God? God means who is all-powerful, all-attractive. Actually people, they generally say God, and they, just out of some sentiment or dogmatism or fanaticism, they say, who I believe in must be God. But not many people go very deeply into trying to understand what is the nature of God and who is God. But Jesus himself, he never claimed to be God. He claimed himself as the Son of God. That's all. What makes Krishna the supreme God of all? Well, he eternally is so. Now, if anyone makes him God, then he's not God. And who made him God is that is his eternal position. But it's understood that Krishna is God because he has all the qualities of God. Why do we call this a book and not a book stand? Because it has the qualities of a book. It has a cover, it has pages. This is what we expect a book to be like. Therefore, when we say book, that is the proper description of this particular object. And when we say, why do we call this a book stand? Because it exactly fits the description of what a book stand should be. So when we say God, of course, nowadays there are many misunderstandings of what the term God means, because people are not serious to understand. But actually God means the supreme. So if we examine, we'll find that Krishna is supreme. Mataparataram nanyat kinchidasti jananjaya. No one is equal to, no one is greater. This we have to understand from Shastra. Therefore he is accepted. The next question, if Jesus is not the path for salvation, I see. Yeah, if Jesus is not the path for salvation, then how come it has grown up? In other words, if Jesus is not the way for salvation, then how has Christianity flourished? Well, we don't say that that by following Jesus one cannot be elevated. But it's not necessarily that because something is untrue that it can prosper, that it won't prosper. You could also say that, actually this was my question, that before I came to Krishna consciousness, you see because I was brought up in a Christian family and I was told only by Jesus, and then I thought, well, there are other religious groups in the world who are also talking about God. And are they all completely untrue? Is it that there are no saintly people in other traditions? So that made me look more deeply to try to understand what is actually the nature of God. Is God only in the church? And then I'm from a Catholic family, so then he should only be in the Catholic church, not in the Protestant church. So I could understand that understanding of God is not restricted to some dogmatic faith. But God is for everyone, and he can be approached by following great personalities like Jesus. Of course, Jesus, he himself said that there are many things I have to say, but you cannot understand them all. And it appears that anyway, people who are talking about following Jesus, they hardly follow him at all. That's another big discussion. But actually, if by historical analysis, it seems pretty much certain that Jesus was a vegetarian, and that the descriptions in the Bible are somewhat twisted to make him look like a meat eater. And he wasn't a drunkard either, as the Bible, the modern Bible, which is historically known to have been changed, as it makes him out to be. He was a great saintly person. Great saintly people, they don't eat blood and flesh. But some of his later so-called followers, they wanted to eat blood and flesh, so they changed the Bible to make him a meat eater. So if you really want to follow Jesus, then the first thing is stop going to the butcher's shop. That will help you. Oh, there's some question. What is the role of Adi Shesh in the process of creation of this universe? Who asked this question? Why do you want to know that in particular? Well, why in particular they want to know that? It's just some curiosity. It's a strange question. What is the role of Adishesh? He is the servant of the... He is the Lord, but he takes the form of the servant of the Lord. So, actually, he's also non-different from Sankarshan. Different and non-different. Through whose agency the creation is affected. Please briefly explain this. I can't understand this. Pancharatrik Vidhi, Bhagavati Vidhi, and what's this? Vaidhi Bhakti?
Vaidhi Bhakti.
What's that?
Vaidic.
Vaidic. What does it say?
Vedic.
Vidhi? That says Vidhi? Yeah, well, Vedic Vidhi means that which is given in the Vedas. That actually nowadays no one can follow all these different rules. Very complicated, just like to chant the Vedas. Who can chant the Vedas if they're actually very pure Brahmanas? They're following all the rules and regulations, and that by their chanting, by the mantras that they chant, a very powerful effect can be had. Just like I was saying, that water, within that water was imbued the power to produce a child. So much so that even a man drank it and the child came. But to follow that system, one requires very pure Brahmana and very expert in chanting mantras. If even one svara is slightly wrong, then the whole thing is changed. The Vedic mantras have to be pronounced with correct pronunciation and in exactly the right svara, how do you say? The right meter. So that's not possible in the modern age. In the modern age, the Pancharatrik Vidhi that is recommended, which gives the same result but in a more easy manner. In Pancharatrik Vidhi, it's Vidhi means there are rules and regulations to be followed, but in Pancharatrik Vidhi, because in Kali Yuga people can't follow everything so properly, so the bhavana or the feeling that is emphasized and accepted, that the Lord, He accepts the feeling of the devotee. Still there are many rules and regulations to follow, but it's not as difficult as the Vedic system, and it's also not as restricted as the Vedic system, because in the Vedic system generally one has, like this whole point, one has to be born in a Brahmin family and then he'll be trained in all these things. Not necessarily so, but generally so. And elevation comes slowly through different lifetimes, whereas in the Pancharatrik system, it's very common that anyone from any background, because generally in Kali Yuga, Kalo Shudra Sambhava, even if one is superficially born in a Brahmin family, everyone is of Shudra nature. So Pancharatrik Vidhi takes anyone from any background and gives them the chance to immediately engage in the service of the Lord. And that's particularly concerned with deity worship. Whereas Bhagavata Vidhi, that is concerned principally with hearing and chanting about Krishna. So these Pancharatrik Vidhi and Bhagavat Vidhi, they should go side by side, because Pancharatrik Vidhi, that also gives us so many rules and regulations to help us to purify our existence. Actually, Bhagavata Vidhi, that means direct, pure Krishna consciousness, in which that is the dharma of the soul, to fully engage in hearing and chanting about Krishna. But we also require some rules and regulations to purify our existence, because we're not purely on the platform of pure Krishna consciousness. Just like we have this book here of Vangshidas Babaji. He never bathed. He had deities, but he never did puja. He sometimes insulted his deities, quite often actually. So he's on the platform of pure Krishna consciousness. But we can't. If we do that, then we'll go to hell. because he was in that consciousness of simply loving Krishna. He could do that and Krishna would be pleased with that. But for us, we have to follow the rules and regulations by which we can gradually come to that platform. This helps us by performing deity worship, by rising early, you see, Vamshidas also, there was no such thing as rising early or late for him, because he had no conception of day or night. He was so much absorbed in Krishna Bhakti that day or night, it didn't mean anything to him. Just, he would do everything, he would do it. At any time of day or night or whatever he would do. So in the morning, he would say a few prayers and that was it. Otherwise, sometimes he would get up in the middle of the night and just go somewhere. It's completely beyond all rules and regulations. But we need rules and regulations. As devotees, what duties should we perform on the death of relatives? This is a very important question. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur took this very seriously. He wanted to, actually Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he was making a revolution against Smarta Vidhi. There's another kind of Vidhi, Smarta Vidhi. According to Smartavad, one should follow the Smriti Shastras, all the different rules and regulations. Now, things like that, doing archaman after touching something, but to an extreme. Now, in Smartavad, the idea is that you follow the rules and regulations of the Varnashram system according to your caste, and then gradually you get elevated and you take birth in a Brahmin family. And then you're a Brahmin, you're very pure, and then you go to the heavenly planets or whatever, and then you go up and down, you enjoy life, and then you become fed up of that, and then you become a Jnani, and then you get moksha, and you merge into the existence of God. It ultimately comes to Mayavad. So, according to Smarta Vidhi, there's the karma, that means they're following karma kanda. And upon the death of a relative, they'll perform so many different activities according to the Smarta Vidhi. But Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he was very much against his disciples following this. They should follow according to Vaishnava Vidhi. And show that they have their faith in Krishna by following that. So we should follow according to the Vaishnava Vidhi. That is, according to the death, on the death of a relative, there are certain rules and regulations for it. The main thing is we should call 3 days after the death of a relative. We should call everyone and have a kirtan and distribute prasadam to everyone on behalf of the departed soul. That is the simple method of doing it. Of course, if your relatives are not in devotional service, then you can let the other relatives do whatever they like. So there are no more questions, probably no more time either. There are many things to be said. Many things. For this purpose I'm writing books, because I can speak a few things here and there. And also there are so many technical points, I haven't studied everything. So therefore I'm writing books on different subjects, mostly all things that Prabhupada has discussed, and I'm systematically organizing them, just like Prabhupada told us how we should practice Krishna consciousness. So although that was, Prabhupada had told so many things. Beginner's Guide? Oh, this is Beginner's Guide. We don't have it in English? So, mostly these things were written, these were told in, Prabhupada had said verbally, but I collected all these things and made one book. Practically, how to practice Krishna consciousness is given a Beginner's Guide to Krishna consciousness. Then Prabhupada gave many instructions on sense control, in brahmachari life. So I collected that and made brahmacharya and Krishna consciousness, which is also essential for all devotees, grihastas, matajis, because brahmacharya means practicing spiritual life, controlling the senses. So that is required for all devotees. And Prabhupada used to speak a lot about India's great spiritual heritage and how the Indian people should follow that. So I collected all that and made this book, which we don't have in English here, I think. Only have it here in Gujarati and Marathi, which might be helpful if there are any Gujaratis or Marathas here. And then many people asked me about my remembrances of Prabhupada, so I made a book. My memories of Srila Prabhupada. Then again, Prabhupada was talking so much about Indian culture and we should follow this, so I made a book about traditional Indian culture. And I also have some biographical books I wrote. I was speaking about Banshidas Babaji, so I wrote a book about Banshidas Babaji. And here's another book about a great devotee of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, great preacher, 2 generations after Mahaprabhu, 3 generations. Rasikananda. And also I got one book published, Ramayana, which we only have here in Gujarati. I don't have it here in English. So like this, I'm trying to compile a few books on all these different subjects. And I'm also trying to distribute these books. So you can kindly help me and encourage me by taking some of these books. And hopefully you'll also get some benefit from that. Generally, devotees are telling me that they got benefit from reading these books. So you may kindly take these books, and there's some prices there for each of them, and if you like you can bring them to me and I'll sign them also. But first I'm going to distribute a little prasad here. And sorry, I have to rush off. I have another program somewhere, I know, someplace. Somnath or whatever. Sonapur.